just wrapped his testimony before the House Judiciary Committee.
But his long day continues. He is scheduled to go in front of the House Intelligence Committee next. And for almost 4 hours this morning, lawmakers had questioned Mueller about his findings of his investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. Democrats focusing on allegations of obstruction of justice on the part of the president, while some Republicans tried to go after Mueller's credibility. So a lot to break down here. We do want to bring in Brandy with more analysis as we wait for round two of the testimony to begin. Brandy.
Yeah, good morning. What a round one it was. John McKay joining us again, former United States attorney. I was telling you earlier, great guy to have on set. You know Robert Mueller. You've also testified before this committee.
Yes.
And so we wanted to reflect on what happened this morning, and then we'll preview what's going to happen in intelligence. So there was one moment that really for both of us seems to have stood out during the morning hearing. What's interesting about it is it came from a Republican, Ken Buck of Colorado.
Yes.
And he clearly got an answer from Robert Mueller that, one, he wasn't expecting, and two, probably made the Democrats pretty happy. Watch.
When it came to obstruction, you threw a bunch of stuff up against the wall to see what would stick.
Well,
and that is fundamentally unfair.
I would not agree to that characterization.
Could you charge the president with a crime after he left office?
Yes.
You believe that you could charge the president of the United States with obstruction of justice after he left office?
Yes.
What does that moment mean to you?
It reminds me of being in a courtroom when you ask a question and you're not sure what the answer is going to be, and it's not a good answer. I think that's what Congressman Buck got.
Yeah.
He wasn't expecting Robert Mueller to directly say, yes, the president could be indicted before a grand jury after he leaves office. And instead of just going away from the question, he asked it again, which I thought was interesting and just underscored that moment. So that may be the moment so far, at least in the House Judiciary Committee, that was a surprise and we weren't expecting today.
Yeah, maybe the single moment that wasn't good for the president, and it came from a question from a Republican.
It's ironic.
Fascinating. I want to speak quickly about Representative Pramila Jayapal of our state, who is the only congressperson from our delegation on the Judiciary Committee. She had a moment where she spent her entire testimony going point by point about what the investigation lays out in regards to witness tampering against Paul Manafort when it came to the president, promising or alluding to maybe giving him a pardon, asking him not to flip, so to speak. I want to play a moment of that for you.
It is clear that the president both publicly and privately discouraged Mr. Manafort's cooperation or flipping, while also dangling the promise of a pardon if he stayed loyal and did not share what he knew about the president. Anyone else who did these things would be prosecuted for them. We must ensure that no one is above the law. And I thank you for being here, Director Mueller.
Based on what you know, John, do you agree with the Congresswoman's characterization that anyone else who did what the president did in this case would be charged with something?
Look, I think it's a complex question as to whether a sitting president can be charged with a crime or could even commit the basic elements of a crime, including obstruction of justice. So it is a complicated question, but I think Congresswoman Jayapal asked the right question. Because I think many would argue that if the President of the United States offered to use his constitutional power of a pardon to cause a witness to change their testimony, even that might be considered an illegal obstruction of justice, and certainly one that Congress would want to consider if it were to consider impeachment. I think she got right to a very, very important point.
Well, and then that speaks to what Ken Buck of Colorado got Mueller to say, which is the president could be charged with a crime after he leaves office. Again, your legal perspective on that, based on what we know from the 448-page report, is there enough evidence to go after the president for obstruction of justice when he is no longer the president?
I think that's clearly the case. I think there are more than 10 examples laid out in the Mueller report. In the House Judiciary Committee that we've just listened to this morning for the past 3 hours, a number of the Democratic questioners focused on a handful of those, maybe 4 or 5 of the most obvious examples of attempting to interfere with the investigation. So I think that point's been made pretty clearly.
In our production booth, you can take that live shot. I think people are starting to mull around at this upcoming intelligence hearing. This is supposed to at least focus on Russian interference in the election, which is pretty indisputable that it happened. Do you anticipate the second hearing being as tense as the first, given that this should be an indisputable fact we agree on?
Unfortunately, it's going to be just as intense
But
as
why?
we saw in the Judiciary Committee. It shouldn't be, Brandy, you're right. You'd think that the Intelligence Committee would focus on part 1 of the Mueller report, which everybody agrees demonstrates Russian intent, Russian governmental engagement and an attempt to influence in Donald Trump's favor the outcome of the 2016 election. You'd think that would be the focus. We should remember that the chairman of the Intelligence Committee is a former federal prosecutor. So I think you may see a swing back to some of the issues that were raised in the Judiciary Committee.
Overall, as I mentioned earlier, you know Robert Mueller. And prior to this whole special counsel thing, he's a well-respected guy, right?
Oh, yes.
I mean, was there any argument that he was well-respected?
No, I think that if you were to try to locate the person who is the most respected prosecutor and investigator, 12 years as head of the FBI, the only person meeting those qualifications would be Robert Mueller. He is highly regarded. I don't think there's any question about that. And the tactic here by the Democrats, I mean, by the Republicans, the Democrats have their own tactics, but the Republican tactic is to attack Robert Mueller and his report. The report is fair game, but I think attacking him and his motives is really below the belt.
Final question for you. If you look back at the hearing, I don't want to say who won and who lost, but both sides, by the way, Democrats and Republicans, they both held mock hearings before today to sort of practice their questions. If you're just an everyday American, maybe let's try to say a moderate American. Is there a winner or a loser when it comes to their line of questioning and who kind of came off with the best information?
You know, I think the American public and the United States of America are losers at this point with regard to Russian interference. I mean, we've lost on that. We don't have a response yet to the Russian government for its clear attempt to violate federal laws. And with regard to obstruction, we may just have to wait until this president is out of office. I mean, that may be the outcome here.
All right, so intelligence, Russian interference. I am going to just really hope for America that both sides can have a good conversation about Russian interference in our election during this next hearing.
I think there's been some honing of these issues before the Judiciary Committee, so it may be set up well, and people just watch for the next 2 hours as Robert Mueller goes down the hall and now testifies in front of the House Intelligence Committee.
All right, they'll be watching, we'll be watching. John McKay, former United States Attorney, we appreciate your legal analysis, and by the way, you can catch him tonight on Q13 News at 8 p.m. Bless you, John McKay, staying here late as this marathon day continues. We're going to get a check of weather. MJ?